Hello, dear colleagues. We are glad to welcome you on our webinar, which is related to Google Tax. And we will talk today about new legislation in Ukraine and Kazakhstan, and not so new legislation in Russia and Belarus. While we are waiting that all our participants join us for this webinar, I will briefly introduce my colleagues and present myself and topics which will be covered during our webinar. So we will start with overview of Russian rules in relation to Google Tax, and this topic will present I, Lokatosh Ekaterina, tax team lead of Moscow office in Russia. Then I will pass a word to my colleague Sergey Odintsov from Belarus.
Hello.
And my colleague Artem Baranov from Ukraine.
Hello.
And overview about Kazakhstan will provide my colleague Maria Nazarova.
Hello, dear guest.
In the end of our webinar, I again will give you an overview of new rules which will be established in the future in Eurasian Union in relation to taxation of electronic services. Please note that we will go country by country and ask you to give and leave your questions in the chat, and we will be glad to answer them in the end of our webinar. We will wait a few, maybe 1 or 2 minutes so that all our participants will join us. While we're waiting, I'll just give you a brief overview why this topic is so important at present and why we have decided to organize this webinar and share with you our knowledge and experience in this field. First of all, in Russia and Belarus, the regulations in this field are already into force, and we have already experience in this field and practice which will be interesting for you. And when we are talking about Ukraine and Kazakhstan, it is important to know that new regulation will start from January 1st next year. And for the companies which are planning or already working on these two markets, it is important to know about new regulation. And on the level of Eurasian Union, starting from January this year, the conversation about changes in legislation in this field started, and at present, we have the document approved, which will regulate these questions in the future. And we will briefly introduce possible regulation which will start most probably from 2023. So I think all colleagues who wanted to join us have started. And who joined us a little later and not from the starting, I again welcome you and start our webinar. And we will consider first Google Tax in Russia. I'll give you overview of the rules and provide you a latest news in this field. So starting from 2017, it is obligatory to be registered with a Russian tax authority for foreign companies who are rendering electronic services to the physical persons. And rendering of electronic services to legal entity starting from 2019 leads to necessity to be registered in Russia as well. It is not needed to be registered if foreign company provides services via agent. Agent can be a Russian legal entity or foreign legal entity. In this case, agent pays VAT by itself to the budget, and there is no need to be registered for foreign company itself. The obligation to be registered arises within 30 days after starting of services provision. And after registration, company receives tax identification number, which it reflects on all documents when working with Russian clients. And based off paid invoices, the company have to calculate tax base and submit VAT returns quarterly. VAT returns are submitted through web interface, and it should be done within 25 days after each quarter. In general, I would say our experience that everything is organized electronically, including registration and submission of VAT returns, and each taxpayer gets virtual room on the website of Federal Tax Service and get access and receives all information through this web room. Which services are treated as electronic and which are not? This is a very important question when we consider the necessity of registration of foreign legal entity in Russia. The most popular service which we see when which leads to necessity of registration is provision of software and database. It is important to know that this provision should be performed via remote access. The most popular case is when software is downloaded via internet and license on it is activated by codes which are also provided via internet. Other options which are less popular are a provision of advertising services on internet, provision of domains, hosting services, and the full list of electronic services is provided in Russian tax code. And by the end of our webinar, among all other materials, you will receive a checklist according to which you will be able to decide if your company renders electronic services or not, and is there any necessity to be registered in Russia. In addition to it, we have a list of services which are directly treated as non-electronic. It is a situation when goods, works, and services are only ordered through internet, but they are physically delivered. For example, sale of goods order, which when we place order on an internet, is not considered as electronic services, and it itself does not lead to all these implications what we are talking about now. Consulting services via internet specially mentioned in the list of services which are not electronic. When a software or database is recorded on some hard drives and provided on physical material drives, it is also not considered as electronic services. And providing internet access is also excluded from this regulation. Main tax implication which should be considered when we're talking about electronic services in Russia is that due to the fact of registration, company should pay VAT not only in relation to electronic services, but non-electronic also. It is a little bit controversial issue which was discussed in 2019. After that, a federal tax service issued a clarifications about how this should be treated and how it works. In general, I would say that the companies pay VAT in relation to electronic and not non-electronic services. However, a main change in relation to legislation which was previously into force, that Russian legal entity which buys services now is not considered as a tax agent. And if a Russian legal entity will continue paying VAT as a tax agent as it was before, it will lead to non-possibility to offset this VAT paid to the budget while calculating tax base. Due to this fact, most of foreign legal entities are registering because Russian clients refuse to work with them and lose VAT which they cannot offset. Because offset is possible only if foreign company is registered in Russia. Currently, a tax rate which is applicable to electronic services is 16.67%. It is calculated tax rate, which means that VAT is considered as included in the cost of services. Tax base is defined upon amounts received by the end of tax period and recalculated into rubles on using course on the last day of the tax period, which is a quarter. Considering possible negative tax implications, we need to mention that we have special provision in tax code which establish fines and penalties to foreign legal entities which are not registered. It is a provision according to which any legal entity which performs a business activity without registration can be fined, and the fine is put in amount of 10% of revenue received. However, so now we didn't have experience that some foreign company was asked to pay these penalties and fines, even if it was registered with Russian tax authority with means it was a late registration, like company, for example, was supposed to be registered in January, but did it only by the end of the year. Tax authority didn't put fines on such companies till now. And the other negative application actually I already mentioned, that if there is no registration of a foreign company and it provides services to Russian clients, they cannot offset VAT paid in the as a part of cost of these services. So possible changes which are being discussed and necessary to mention, that most probably soon necessity of registration will be cancelled in relation to situation when a foreign company provides electronic services under intergroup agreements. Means the only clients are the affiliated company. Actually, this will influence about 60 or 70% of companies which are already registered. I'm talking now about the companies, for example, which are our clients. I need to mention that some methodological issues will be solved. And for example, we will have a 20% tax rate instead of 16.67%, and 10% tax rate will be established for electronic books. In addition to it, would like to give you a light on the new regulation which is coming up from the next year, starting from 2022. Foreign companies which have more than 500,000 Russian visitors daily should be registered in Russia in the form of branch, representative office, or Russian legal entity. and these companies are considered as obliged to be registered if they there is information in Russian on their site. They provide advertisement targeted at Russian users, and they process data of Russian users, and they receive money from Russian individuals. In addition to it, we have a list of companies who should be registered without considering the number of users, and they are listed on the right side of the slide. They are hosting providers, operators of advertising systems, which targets Russian users, and maintainers of programs for receiving and sending electronic messages. These companies should be registered without consideration of a number of users. And as I said, registration is necessary starting from next year, and they need to create an account of Roskomnadzor side. This new regulation means that such companies like Google, Facebook, Spotify, and about a list of 13 companies already announced, which are expected to be registered to be compliant with this rule. So actually, these rules which I wanted to outline in relation to current and future legislation in Russia. And I remind you that you can leave your questions in the chat, and we will answer them in the end of our webinar. And I'm glad to pass the word to my colleague Sergey Odintsov from Belarus, who will outline the local changes and regulations in Belarus. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Katya. So now, dear colleagues, dear guests, please wait a minute. We will put on our presentation. So, and we will see how the things are going on with VAT taxation of digital services in Belarus. Wait a minute. So, okay. So, rules in Russia, yes, we have quite similar rules in Belarus, but to be honest, we also have some peculiarities, which I would like to describe in the next, let's say, 10 minutes. So, as concerns regulatory requirements, as we have those since 2019. And especially from that time, we have taxation, VAT taxation of services, also known as digital services. What should be mentioned here is that tax treatment of such services is very dependent on the status of the customer who is purchasing or buying the services. So we have two scenarios here. The first scenario is when your customer is a legal entity, either local or a foreign legal entity that has tax registration in Belarus, and this entity purchases the services. So then it is definitely everything clear here. The purchase of services acts as a tax agent to what your VAT obligations, and this company files VAT returns, pays VAT from its own funds. So you will receive of 100% on your invoices. And another case is when the purchase of services is individual, or we call it consumer. So when you're rendering the services, digital services to consumer. And that is the case, what our presentation will be focusing on today. So local rules clearly defines what should be understood under digital services. Meanwhile, my colleague Katya already mentioned that after this webinar, you will be provided with the so-called checklist on each jurisdiction, which can be used by you as a guide to understand or even to assess whether you need any let's say any risk, or whether you have any risk, or whether you need to complete with tax registration for VAT purposes in Russia or in Belarus. So our tax code also has some provisions regarding to cases when the digital services or some services similar to digital services, and these are not recognized as taxable objects for VAT. So here you can see the slide where the services and the operations are listed. So normally we have the same rules here as in Russia, as Russia has. So speaking about place of supply rule, this is, I would say, the main criterion for VAT taxation of services. And we believe this would help you to assess if your company has to register for VAT purposes in Belarus and paying taxes. So in a nutshell, if your client lives in Belarus or pays for your services using the credit card issued by Belarusian bank, or your client uses a laptop with a domain number assigned to Belarus, or uses a phone which has again local numbers starting from 375, then it is definitely that you are rendering the services which are treated as supplied in Belarus, and you have to deal with VAT registration for that. So the next slide can be used as a so-called guidance to assess if you need to be registered for tax purposes in Belarus. For instance, if your company supplies digital services as per the prescribed lists, please make sure that such list is exhaustive. So, and if the service portfolio which you're going to supply is not included into the list, so no concerns here at all. So for the time being, you do not need to register for VAT purposes and pay tax in Belarus. But if the purchase of services is consumer in Belarus, and the services belongs to the established list, then please consider to proceed with VAT registration. How to complete the registration? You could see a brief overview on the next slide. So, frankly speaking, registration is performed online. We have a specific web resource of Tax Ministry. You see the link on the screen. What you need to do is just to download the page, to fill in the application for tax registration, and to attach to the application excerpt from commercial or company register to justify that your company has actual legal status. From practical perspective, both of these documents, application for VAT registration and extract from commercial or trade register, they are in English, and you do not need here to deal with any translation or notary certification related issues in connecting to the company excerpt. And that is really good practice. What else to mention here is that the term of registration, or the period in which you need to complete VAT registration, is I would say, very wide. So if you start to providing the services in one quarter, so you may provide the services, issue invoices, and collecting money from consumers, but you have to register for VAT purposes in this quarter, so not earlier than the last day of the quarter. So once you have registered, you need to consider VAT compliance requirements, the overview of which you can see on the screen. Important points here is that we have 20% VAT rate, and the VAT is calculated on the cost of services including VAT. So we're using a specific formula to calculate the amount of VAT, where we have the we multiply we have 20% and then dividing 20% on 120 in order to receive the amount of VAT. This is just quite similar to what my colleague Katya has mentioned, that this is a kind of calculated rate of VAT, which is currently 16.67%. But to be legally precise and to be precise from tax perspective, we should say that standard rate of VAT is 20%, and this rate is applicable to digital services. Another significant point here is that you do not need to open a bank account in order to make payments. I mean, tax payments. You also don't need to issue VAT invoices, as all our taxpayers in Belarus do currently. VAT reporting and payment obligations, they are on a quarterly basis, so you have to report your VAT records, your VAT, let's say, transactions or operations on digital services using standard forms. We have two forms of reporting. The first one is the so-called VAT return, and the second form is, again, it is quite similar to VAT return, but it is called as information on services or on figures or on some information on services or on figures of taxable objects. So both forms are in English, so you don't need to waste too much time in order to complete these forms. However, in our practice, some foreign companies, they prefer to engage local consultants or local tax advisors to deal with these forms. So, and what companies are registered? So we have quite significant amount of companies. As of now, according to tax ministry statistics, there are more than 120 companies currently registered with tax authorities. So some multinational companies, their logos you can see on the screen. Coming next, what to expect in the nearest future is that it is very likely that our tax legislation will be amended for provisions according to which VAT will be paid on electronic trade of goods. What to mention here is that clear and more precise information as how should we treat these operations, what is electronic trade of goods, what type of platforms should be used. We expect to get some more clarity on this matter once the final amendments to the tax code will be introduced. And we are expecting to get this information in the coming weeks or so. So that is definitely all from Belarus side. And should you have any questions, please do let us know in the chat or after the event. And now I would like to pass in the word to my colleague Artyom, who will let us know how the things are going on with taxation of VAT services, digital services in Ukraine. Thank you. Artyom, so the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sergey. Hello, dear participants. I will share my screen as well and show you the presentation. So we are going to speak about the taxation of electronic services in Ukraine. Unlike the situation in Russia and Belarus, these services are, this new legislation is coming into force starting from the 1st of January 2022. So a lot of new things for the taxpayers, and we are going to speak about what are the electronic services, what are the exemptions, what are the peculiarities of registration of foreign companies as taxpayers, what are the procedures of tax reporting and payments. So as I said, there is a new law which has been adopted this year in June. This is the law 1525, which actually introduces for the first time the VAT taxation of electronic services in Ukraine. The law prescribes that there is a certain set of services which corresponds to the requirements and can be called as e-services, and these services are subject to VAT in Ukraine under the standard tax rate of 20%. There is a special procedure of registration for foreign companies as a VAT payers, and as well there is a simplified procedure of tax reporting and tax payment in these cases. So what are actually e-services in Ukraine? The list is pretty similar to the lists demonstrated by my colleagues in Russia and Belarus, but here important point that the list is not exhaustive. The most common services from this list are, for instance, subscription to electronic newspapers, magazines, and books, or delivery of electronic copies of music, videos, or games, online education, cloud services, delivery of software, and advertising in internet. However, other services might be also added to the list or treated as e-services, I think further when we will have the first practice from the Ukrainian tax authorities. There is also a list of exemptions, which is also quite similar to the practice already shown to you from other countries. So provision of internet services, consulting services per email, supply of goods services which were ordered by internet do not belong to the e-services and should not be taxed with VAT in Ukraine. In which cases the e-services have to be actually taxed. There is a list of requirements. So these services have to be supplied by a foreign company in Ukraine, which does not have a permanent establishment here. Recipients of the services are individuals and private entrepreneurs, which are not registered as a VAT payers. The services have to be supplied at the customs territory of Ukraine, and the place of supply should be determined either by official registration of recipient who is private entrepreneur. In this case, the official address is important, or if this is a regular individual, it has to be determined by IP address from which the services have been received. And in addition, the supplier of these services has to be registered with the Ukrainian tax authorities as a VAT payer. What is the procedure and grounds for VAT payer registration for foreign companies who supply e-services? So there is a mandatory procedure which says that all the foreign companies who provides e-services in the volume which is more than 1 million hryvnia amount. This is slightly more than 33,000 euros. For the previous year, have to be registered as a VAT payers in Ukraine till the end of March 2022. If the registration does not take place, then liability might be imposed by Ukrainian tax authorities, and in this case, the non-residents for the first violation can be subject to a 10% penalty of non-paid VAT from the services supplied. And as well, there is a voluntary procedure, which means that if the non-resident desires to be registered as a VAT payer in Ukraine, it can be done at its discretion. The documents have to be provided in electronic form. Among the documents, there are application for registration, a digital copy of tax register, trade register extract, and the document which confirms ID number of the company if the letter was not provided in the trade register extract. It is announced that the registration of VAT payers will be done through a special web portal via a web resource of Ukrainian tax service, and there will be a possibility to do this in English language. So maximally simplified for foreign companies. There is a certain procedure of registration which consists of the following steps. So the documents have to be filed in electronic forms. Ukrainian tax authorities have 3 days to verify the documents and information which they contain. Afterwards, they take decision on either registration as a VAT payer or refusal if something is not completely provided or the non-resident does not correspond to the requirements for the registration. With the registration, the foreign company obtains Ukrainian VAT number, as well as information about requirements to reporting and tax payments, speaking about deadlines and requirements, how to do the actual payments. And there is also one step from the foreign company. Within 180 calendar days, the company needs to confirm the registration data via official letter provided to Ukrainian tax authorities. What new do we have in terms of tax reporting and tax payments by foreign companies? So first of all, there will be a simplified form of VAT return. It can be composed in English language as well. There will be no possibility to claim the incoming VAT in such cases. Tax period for the VAT reporting and payments will be a calendar quarter. The payments can be done in a foreign currency, but only limited to US dollars or euros. And there is no necessity to open the bank account in Ukraine. It can be done also from the foreign bank account. The deadlines for reporting are 40 calendar days after the end of the reporting quarter, and a deadline for the payment is 30 calendar days after the end of the reporting period. So this is it about Ukrainian new legislation. As I said, we have still no practice. This is pretty new, so to say, a New Year's present to suppliers of such services, and in addition to Ukrainian customers, as it is expected that probably the tax will be part of the price for the services. So we will carefully observe the developments in this regard in Ukraine, and will provide you with updates via our webpage and social medias about developments. Now I will pass word to my colleague, Maria, and Maria will update you about the situation in Kazakhstan with electronic services taxation. Thank you for your attention.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Artem. Let me introduce myself. My name is Maria Nazarova. I am head of tax practice in Schneider Group in Kazakhstan. Meanwhile, I will put a presentation on the site. Let me proceed with the speech about Kazakhstan. Actually, legislation about electronic services and electronic trade of goods is pretty new in Kazakhstan. Regardless of other countries, we have a bit poor provisions in Kazakhstan tax code about this tax regulation. In the section in the tax code was actually introduced in Kazakhstan from 2021 and will come into effect in the next year from January 2022. And we will talk about today in Kazakhstan about actually foreign companies and their supplies of goods and services, electronic one, to individuals rather than companies, because earlier, actually, Kazakhstan provided provisions on taxation of foreign services by foreign companies in form of consultant marketing or, for example, advertising one, which actually taxed by VAT through taxations in Kazakhstan. And this is actually not the talk of today. Today we will talk about taxation of foreign companies here in Kazakhstan and their responsibilities. Actually, in the new section of the tax code in Kazakhstan provides definitions of the services in electronic form, which means the services that are provided to individuals through telecommunication network and internet. Electronic trade of goods, ETG further on, is electronic sale of goods to individuals through internet platforms. An internet platform means information system at which organized electronic trade of goods. A foreign company is a legal entity or not legal entity, an organization which carries on entrepreneurial activity. And currently is under consideration and final approval by the government of Kazakhstan. New definition merchant ID is a unique set of symbols which is actually identifying a foreign company as a recipient of the money for the respective goods or services. Kazakhstan tax legislation provides so-said conditional registration. Actually, such registration is made by foreign companies who makes electronic foreign trade and provision of electronic services. This registration is made by paper, and actually the information consisting of full name of the foreign company, its tax registration number or its analog should be involved in this paper, as well as state registration number or its analog, bank details from which VAT will be paid by this foreign company to the tax authorities of Kazakhstan, some list of requisites including merchant ID and its address requisites, including its address, physical address at this country of incorporation or its residency country. Here is the question, how should complete this information foreign companies, whether this information should be provided in Russian or English. Actually, tax code is silent about this. So this is a question which should be considered in the nearest time by the tax authorities. Who is VAT payer in Kazakhstan? By VAT payer, foreign company VAT payer is recognized an entity through internet platform of which electronic trade of goods is carried on. By the foreign company recognized for VAT purposes is also recognized an electronic service provider. Here it's important to note that foreign companies that registered already in Kazakhstan as, for example, branches or representative offices are not considered here for these purposes. They are paying VAT taxes based on their regular tax registration. When a foreign company calculates VAT, first of all, the company should, foreign company which supplies electronic trade of goods or provide electronic services, should consider whether its buyer lives in Kazakhstan, whether bank account from which actually individual is paying for such services or goods which is provided by a foreign company is registered on the territory of Kazakhstan, whether a network of individual who is purchasing these services is registered in Kazakhstan, or international country code of telephone number through which actually the transaction is made or services paid is also registered in Kazakhstan. And if one of these conditions is met, it means that a foreign company should calculate VAT. Here it's important to know that foreign companies, VAT payers, should not actually issue electronic VAT invoices, which is good. When and how much should a foreign company supplying electronic services or supplying goods to individuals in Kazakhstan, they should pay 12% VAT. Actually, this is general our tax rate in Kazakhstan, and the payment should be done before 25th day of the second month following the reporting quarter in which actually the supply of goods or electronic services were provided. What is important is important to know that if foreign the goods or services actually provided by foreign company to the individual, they passed customs clearance in Kazakhstan based on legislation of Eurasian Economic Union or the local Kazakhstan custom legislation, and VAT which is paid under this custom clearance will be not subject to refund, then foreign company is exempted for payment of this VAT for this sale. What is important else that currently considered provisions to be included in the legislation of Kazakhstan tax code that banks and payment organizations should actually report information to tax authorities of Kazakhstan about transactions that will be made by the individuals to foreign companies, and this is information should be provided by them based on the results of the reporting quarter. This is not yet actually approved, but we believe that this information will be introduced from the next year. However, it's important to note here that actually information on bank accounts, information of individuals in Kazakhstan is actually not for all individuals should be provided to the tax authorities. Only information about individuals who are making entrepreneurial activity actually in Kazakhstan should be reflected to tax authorities. But we believe when in the nearest time, within a couple of years, all individuals will be subject to reflection of this information to tax authorities. Questions that there are questions actually too many questions which are not clear as of now, and included in what format the foreign companies should submit their information on for conditional registration, including what language should be provided in this paper. Also, it's not clear whether there will be a list of services, contact list of services, which will be considered as electronic services as in other countries, for example, Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus, because we currently do not have such specific list for the services that should be considered as electronic one. Previously, we had actually the project of such list, but it hasn't been approved, and tax code now doesn't consider this. The next question, whether there will be any penalties for late registration for such foreign companies, because currently our administrative code does not contain such provisions. The next question, if, for example, Kazakhstan citizen is living in another country, for example, in Russia, for a long time, and will be using, for example, credit card, which will be issued by Kazakhstan banks. Whether in this case, such transactions will be considered for VAT purposes is, for example, if foreign company should pay, in this case, such VAT in Kazakhstan. The next question, what is the deadline for VAT registration? Because currently, Kazakhstan tax code does not contain such information. And the next question, how foreign companies should check if, for example, imported goods based on foreign trade with this foreign company is actually imported and passed custom clearance in Kazakhstan, and whether this VAT will not be refunded to this actually individual. This is also the question, and it is supposed that foreign companies do not have such information about what is happening in Kazakhstan. Actually, this is all from my side, and if you have any questions, we are at your disposal for answering them, and we will continue monitoring this information and changes with actually connected with this topic, and will provide you with updates on this. Ekaterina will proceed actually with a few words about Eurasian economic vision about the electronic services and taxation within this union.
So Maria, you have to stop your presentation and I will share the screen.
Yeah, just a moment.
Thank you. So I will continue with the presentation in relation to new regulation which is coming up in the Eurasian Union. Let me remind you that currently in Eurasian Union are the following countries: Russia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Armenia. And as we see in Kazakhstan, Kazakhstan, Belarus, and Russia, there is already a regulation in this field. We know that, for example, in Armenia, it is not yet into force, and there is no plans to change this legislation. But if changes will come on the level of Eurasian Union, such changes will be following. So what we have on this level, let's consider this question. In the starting of this year, the colleague of Eurasian Economic Commission issued a draft of a protocol about the changes in agreement about Eurasian Union. Actually, we have a special amendment to this agreement number 18, which regulates these issues of VAT taxation on the level of Eurasian Union. And in November of this year, this protocol was approved. Means now it is not a draft, but approved agreement. Now, the countries which are part of Eurasian Union have to complete their part of work by approving this protocol, and after they will approve it, agreement about Eurasian Union will be implemented in taking into account these changes. So there are two main provisions which should be considered in this in relation to these matters. First of all, the protocol provides rules related to VAT taxation of electronic services within the Eurasian Union. And second question, which is important, rules regarding definition of place of service rendering are updated. It is important to define the place of service rendering because upon this rule, it is defined whether in which country VAT should be paid. So at present, we have only definition in general what are electronic services and main criterion that they are provided via internet. However, list of services should be approved additionally by a colleague of European Union, and at present we don't have this list, and there is no information if it is already approved or not. The protocol defines rules in relation tax-based definitions and rules for VAT payment. In general, they are more or less the same, that tax base is defined by the end of period based on invoices paid during this period, and it is allowed that each country will establish its own reporting period, month or quarter. In relation to VAT registration, it is important to understand who is a customer of such services, and if the customers are physical persons, then registration will be obligatory, and if the customers are legal entities, then the registration is optional, and the rules to follow should be established by each country. For example, as you heard during the presentation of today, the necessity of registration established in this case on the level of countries, and registration for physical persons, for rendering services to physical persons is obligatory. And for example, in Russia, such registration is obligatory when services are provided to legal entities. And in other countries, it is different situation. Like in Belarus, such registration is not required. In the protocol, we have a list of services which are not considered as electronic. They are sale of goods, sale of rights on software and databases if they are provided on hardware or any other material device, and providing access to internet is also not considered as electronic services. So we are waiting and expecting that during the next year, this protocol will come into force, and most probably starting from 2023, it will start to be implemented on the level of Eurasian Union. So, dear colleagues, these are all questions which we wanted to share with you in relation to regulation of VAT on electronic services in these 4 countries. And I have seen actually that there is a question in the chat, and I will see if I...
Katya, would you like to help me to help you? Because I have
yes,
this question.
Yes.
It's from James. James is asking if VAT registration in Russia accepted for e-services in the Eurasian Union, Kazakhstan specifically, or is registration in each individual country required?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the question. It is a really good one, because currently the protocol in how it is planned to be agreed between each countries, it doesn't answer directly to this question, and therefore I assume that each legal entity which works in each country will have to follow requirements of each country. And answering your question, I think that if company is registered in Russia and provides services to, for example, Kazakhstani customers, it will have to be registered on the local level in each country, means in Kazakhstan additionally. Means protocol doesn't comment if this VAT registration will be like accepted. And actually it is according to the main idea of what taxation on the level of Eurasian Union, we have general rule that VAT paid separately in each country. And in order to complete with this rule, each legal entity should be registered when such obligation arises due to provisions of legislation in each country. So I actually do not expect that we will have this possibility to recognize VAT registration in one country, in one of the country of the Union, so that it will be recognized in the other country of the Union. So, and I have there is other question, maybe
Okay, let me help you once
Yes.
again.
Thank you.
Okay, so
Thanks a
it's
lot.
easier for me, of course. Give me a sec. Does the registration of a foreign company in Ukraine as a VAT payer depend on the client to whom these services are provided, legal entities or individuals or entrepreneurs? Whether it is necessary to register a foreign company if it provides electronic services only to a legal entity resident of Ukraine? It's to Artyom, I think.
Yeah, thank you very much for this question. So, of course, it depends, first of all. So in the case of e-services in the new taxation regime, the recipient of such services has to be only individual or a private entrepreneur not registered as a VAT payer. If the recipient is a Ukrainian legal entity, in this case, our tax code prescribes a special procedure for declaration of such tax, where this legal entity is considered as a tax agent. It has to file a special VAT invoice to provide a special VAT declaration to Ukrainian tax authorities, and at the same time, such company can claim this VAT back. So in case of Ukrainian legal entity, there could be a settlement of these amounts, but the VAT is considered as the one which is paid to Ukrainian state budget. So this is the situation which concerns the legal entities, and for recipients, individuals and private entrepreneurs not registered as a VAT payer, this new procedure will apply. I hope yeah, thank you.
Yes, I think you have answered the question. Thank you for the question.
Yes.
Also.
Thanks a lot, dear colleagues, for participating in our webinar. If you don't have any other questions, I think we will be closing our webinar. And if you will have any questions in the future, you can direct them to us. You will receive presentations from
Katya, no, I see another question. What about what about same in Belarus?
Okay, let's listen to Sergey.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. So actually, we do not have a specific VAT registration in Belarus, only pertinent or as concerns to digital services providing to consumers. And that is all. What we have is tax registration, or the so-called general tax registration, which is applicable for any taxes which your company would be paying in Belarus. And up to now, if you're going to start business operations, I mean, not via providing the digital services to consumers, you only have two options. So the first option is you may set up a local legal entity, or you may sign a contract with a local customer, legal entity, or individual entrepreneur. And based on this contract, you will be registered for tax purposes. You will receive a local tax ID number in Belarus. Once the contract is completed, then you will be deregistered from tax authorities.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure if we have answered the question, because the question was exactly the case, that about if there is any difference, if I understand, depending on the type to whom the service is provided. So
No. I already mentioned this. I already covered this matter in the presentation. Just once again to repeat, if the services are provided to legal entity, even foreign legal entity that has tax registration in Belarus, you do not need to complete VAT registration specifically for your foreign company who is providing the services. Only in case the services are provided to individual natural persons or consumers. Do we get you right?
Is the question now answered or still something unclear?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, everything's covered.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Okay, looks like only in Russia, if you render services to legal entities, you have to be registered. In other cases like Ukraine and Belarus, the registration is required if you render services to physical person. So it is a good news for the companies who plan to work in Ukraine and Belarus.
Yeah.
Yes. So colleagues, if you don't have any other questions today, we will close our webinar, and please note that you will get presentations with all information and contact details of our speakers. And if you have any questions in the future, please feel free to address them to us. We will be glad to assist you and answer your questions. You will receive checklists as well. Going through them, you will understand if you need to be registered, and still something will be not clear, please contact us and we will be glad to assist you. So thank you once again for joining us today. I hope this webinar was useful and you got information which was interesting for you. And we are looking forward to meet you on our next events, and have a nice day.
Thank you all.
Okay.
Thank
We
you.
wish you a nice
Bye.
day.
Thank you.
Take
Have a nice
care.
day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Special thanks to the speakers. Bye. Have a great day too.